always impressed when somebody can sing without the piano. I told you some parts of this story before, but I'm always reminded of it because when we talk about finding our direction or following our star, I think about my sons. I have 4 sons. 3 of them have always had direction from early on in their life. The 4th one struggled a little more with finding his star, but he did finally find it. But our 2nd son, when he was about 12, fell in love with inline skating. And he started skating hours every day and all weekend long. And by the time he was 14, he was wearing out very expensive skates about every 3 months. Well, with 4 sons and lots of hobbies, we decided that maybe he needed to change his hobby. And when we suggested that, he said, we need to sit down and talk. So when your 14-year-old says that, you listen. He told us that he was a very good skater, and that if he could get into a couple of competitions, he thought he could pick up a sponsor, and then the sponsor would pay for his expensive skates. Well, that sounded like a pretty good bet to us, so we paid the $50 to get him into a competition soon after that. And that very day, he picked up his first sponsor. It was a wheel company called Kryptonics, and from that time on, they sent him all his wheels that he was wearing out so quickly, and these grind plates and t-shirts. We had enough t-shirts in the house for everybody. Apparently Nick was a good skater, and the person who sponsored him at Kryptonics was soon hired by Solomon to develop a skate and to find an international skating team. So Nick was one of 5 boys who got to help design and develop the inline skate for Solomon, and then became a part of their first international team. So before Nick was 16, we had to get him a passport so he could travel around the world competing as an aggressive street inline skater, which meant, yes, he was the one skating down all your handrails and jumping over everything he could find. I even got to where I would drive along going, hey, that's a good rail. He had a pretty direct line to his dream. But there were a lot of obstacles too. He was a good student, but by the time he was a junior, he was traveling a lot, missing a lot of school. He kept up with the schoolwork. He had A's and B's, except the PE teacher kept failing him because he wasn't dressing out. So here's a kid who was skating more than 8 hours a day, and he wasn't dressing in his PE shorts, so he wasn't passing PE. This counselor spoke with the PE teacher, and the PE teacher wouldn't budge, which meant that Nick was not going to graduate from high school if he didn't pass his PE class. So after a lot of talking with the counselor, we decided that the best thing Nick could do was take the proficiency test and get out of high school so that he'd have this opportunity to skate and to travel. Our counselor, the counselor at school, assured us that when Nick was ready, he'd go back to school because he liked school and he was a good student. So whatever, our friends did not approve, and many of them were very verbal about how crazy we were to let him do that. But it was a once-in-a-lifetime opportunity for him, and we do not regret making that decision. One day when he was 21, he came home, he said, you know what, I'm done skating, I want to go back to school. Yay! He decided he wanted to go to Cal Berkeley, so as he did, he got online and figured out which California schools Cal mostly recruits from, and that would be Santa Rosa JC and Santa Monica Community College, in case you want to know. So he divided his JC time up between those 2 schools and got into Cal. He graduated from Cal with honors. He went directly into a PhD program at NYU, and now he's a professor at the University of San Diego. I didn't say this at the first service, but people talked me into bringing his book. He wrote a book, and his book is titled Yes, it is How to Be Awesome, something kind of theory on how not to suck. It's a fun book, but it does talk a lot about these kinds of things that we're talking about today. You know, what makes us go beyond? What makes us do the extra thing, go the extra mile? Nick was never afraid to follow his star. He has more courage in his little finger than I have in my whole personhood. He looked for light wherever he went. He would find it and follow it, whether it was learning how to yo-yo or juggle or play guitar. If he wanted to do something, he concentrated on it with his whole self, and he didn't stop until he not only succeeded but excelled. We had to have his hearing checked 3 times during elementary school because the teachers thought he wasn't hearing them, but he actually was just ignoring them because he was concentrating on whatever it was he was doing. I'm telling you this story because I think that the wise men or women, however many there were courageous in following a direction that they believed in, that they believed they were called to. They saw a star. It was bright when they saw it, when they decided to follow it, when they had to find out what it meant. But it didn't stay brightly shining over Jesus' head, or Herod would have seen it as well and known where he was. And don't forget that Jesus was born in Bethlehem, but then he went to Egypt to escape Herod's killing spree, and then to Nazareth. And it wasn't until he was in Nazareth, when he was almost 2 or just over 2, that the wise men finally found him and worshiped him with gifts. That means for 2 years, the wise men followed a star they saw brightly shining the night of Jesus' birth. But they didn't find him for 2 years. That's a faith in the mission. That's believing when you can no longer see the end game, when you can no longer see the light shining on the path, but believe it to be there, to be directing you forward, directing you toward whatever it is that God has in mind for you. As Christians, we're all on that path. Whatever day we decided to get on that path, I guess, was the day that we saw the light shining over Jesus' head, and we have continued to move in the direction of the light, believing it's what we're called by God to do. But more and more people are leaving this path, giving up because it's hard to see in the dark. We are the faithful remnant, my friends, those of us here in church. We're the ones who are still hanging on to a time when it's not so popular to do that anymore. We live in what is now called a post-Christian era. We live at a time when it's not a given that your neighbor goes to church. In fact, it's not likely that your neighbor's been in a church, especially here in San Francisco, where we have the lowest church attendance in the country. What makes you do it? You know, why are you still here? Who are you people? We need to answer those questions, friends, because we have to decide why we are still here, why we still come. What light shone upon you so brightly that you're still following it, even when the light is now so dim that we have a very hard time seeing it ourselves, let alone convincing anyone else that it's there. I believe that if you're sitting here today, it's because God chose you to be here. And you are courageous enough to come. We are God's beloved, as hard as that may seem. But we are the ones that will help others find the path, even in the dim light. But how do we do that? You know, by being clear, I think, about who we are and whose we are, about having enough courage to truly devote ourselves to God, to put God first above everything else. That is a hard, hard thing to do, and we are not very good at it. We need to steep ourselves in the Word, clinging tightly to our history and our traditions, but only to those things that keep us going forward, and letting go of the things that hold us back and keep us from being relevant to new generations. We need to display our love of God, the light that we bear in our souls, that keeps calling us ahead step by step. The only way that we're going to be able to stay on this path is to immerse ourselves in our faith, to nurture each other in growth, in our relationship with God and with each other, and to hold each other accountable. Another thing we're not very good at doing, but holding each other accountable to the journey. More and more, I believe, will be asked of us, and we need to decide if we're up to the task. Church, as it has always been, is no longer enough. I know how hard that is to hear because most of us remember, right, when the nursery and the Sunday school rooms were full and the youth were running around causing havoc and adults were huddled in small groups and Bible studies and fellowship teams and going on mission trips and service outings. On this back wall, you see the tree with many names on it. Each leaf is a name. That was Temple the last time we did a major capital campaign to fix up the building. Today, as you came in, I think, and as you go out, we'll ask you to put your fingerprints on a tree out there in the narthex to represent who we are now. Who and what is Temple United Methodist Church in the year 2020? We're going to be looking at that a lot over these next few weeks. Our lay leadership team, I've talked about them a couple times, they have been working diligently on looking for our way forward. There's a lot to consider. We have an aging facility that's starting to take its toll on our budget. We, along with every other mainline church in San Francisco, have a shrinking attendance. We rent out every inch of our building all week long so we can afford to maintain it, and that's a problem in itself because the more use the facility has, the harder it is to maintain. We can't just have a few nice events and put an ad in the paper anymore to bring people to work or to church. It doesn't work. Nobody reads the paper, for one thing. We have to be a light shining so bright that people are moved to follow it. But shining brightly while sitting inside a building doesn't do much for those outside of it. How do we become a light to those wandering in the dark on the streets of San Francisco? And how do we become a shining neighbor just to the people on Beverly Street? How do we take this message of who we are and whose we are and share it with those who are longing to be a part of the wonderful family of God, even if they don't know it yet and don't have the language to ask for it? The members of our lay leadership team are, and please stand if you're here, Tyree Johnson, Belinda Robinson, Tia Tiapula, Deisha Davis, Carson Cook, Sandy Harden, Bruce Harden, Mary Rainsky, and Carl Coulter. These folks have been meeting almost weekly for 15 months now. Thanks, you can sit down. I just want people to know who you are. We've been working on a mission action plan that we've spoken with you about before that the district asked us to do. We've been growing together as a team, learning our strengths and weaknesses, getting clear on our spiritual gifts, praying fervently for direction from God. And what I want to say to you is that we're going to be asking you to do some hard things in the future. And what I want to ask of you is that you will trust us. I think that these beautiful people who have been working hard have become the leaders of this church, more so than me, more so than any of us, because they have worked hard to be that. I believe they've been called together by God to lead us. So listen to them. And if you don't agree, you can talk to them about it, but let's have conversation and let's figure out our way forward. Temple is worth saving. A lot of churches are closing right now. A lot of churches are merging. Churches are trying to stay alive. But we have a good reason to stay alive. This is a great church, a great facility. May not always look like this, I don't know. But we're looking for direction. We're looking for help. If you have good ideas, share them. If you want to join us, come on Thursday nights at 7. It's not a closed group. We would love to hear from any of you who have ideas or suggestions. But what I want to tell you is that these folks that have been meeting are your family. They're followers of Christ. They're folks who love each other and love the church, so we can trust them to lead us. This is our time. Arise, shine, temple, for your light has come, and the glory of the Lord has risen upon you. For darkness shall cover the earth, and thick darkness the peoples, but the Lord will rise upon you, and his glory will appear over you. Nations will come to your light, and kings to the brightness of your dawn. I want to see the brightness of our dawn. I love that. Lift up your eyes and look around. They will gather together, and they will come to you. Amen? Amen. Amen. We remind each other that